Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. When a father shows up for a child who isn't his own, miracles happen in the most unexpected places. Captain David Sterling was flying his usual route when 7-year-old Sophie started crying. The little girl was scared and alone, so David did what any good father would do. He sat beside her and started folding paper planes. He taught her how to make them fly, how to find joy in simple things, and how to feel safe again. What David didn't know was that Sophie's billionaire mother was watching from first class. Caroline Blake had everything money could buy, but she had never seen her daughter smile the way she did with this stranger. As those paper planes sailed through the cabin, Caroline realized she was witnessing the one thing her wealth couldn't purchase: the love of a father. Would this chance encounter bring two broken families together? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain David Sterling's weathered flight log sat open on the kitchen counter, its pages filled with 15 years of routine entries. Chicago to Denver, Denver to Phoenix, Phoenix to Seattle. Each flight recorded in careful handwriting, each landing noted with precision. The same methodical approach he brought to everything in his life since losing his wife 3 years ago. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft breathing of 8-year-old Zoe sleeping down the hall. David closed the logbook and rubbed his tired eyes. Tomorrow would bring another red-eye flight. Another night of watching over passengers while they slept. Another morning of coming home to an empty coffee pot and yesterday's dishes. He walked to Zoe's bedroom door and peered inside. She lay curled under her favorite blanket, the one her mother had quilted with tiny airplanes. David had kept that blanket, even though it sometimes made his chest tight with memories. His daughter needed something beautiful to hold on to, something that connected her to the mother she barely remembered. Fatherhood had never been something David took lightly. But single fatherhood was a navigation system he was still learning to trust. The other pilots called him the dad pilot, the one parents requested when they flew with anxious children. He had a way with scared kids, a gentle authority that came from understanding that sometimes the best thing you could do was simply be present. In the morning, he would pack Zoe's lunch, walk her to school, and catch 3 hours of sleep before his pre-flight briefing. Mrs. Henderson next door would pick Zoe up and keep her until he returned. It was a routine that worked mostly. But David knew his daughter needed more than routine. She needed the kind of nurturing that came naturally to mothers, the emotional intimacy that he struggled to provide despite his best efforts. 2,000 miles away, Caroline Blake stood in her corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the Chicago skyline disappear into evening darkness. The city sprawled below her like a circuit board, each light representing connections she had helped build through her technology empire. At 34, she had accomplished everything she had dreamed of as a young programmer, except finding balance. Her assistant knocked softly on the glass door. "Miss Blake?" Sophie's school called. "She's ready for pickup." Caroline glanced at her watch. 7:30. Again. She had promised to be there by 6, had promised Sophie they would have dinner together for once this week. Her daughter was probably sitting in the aftercare room, drawing pictures of families that looked nothing like their own. "I'll be right down," Caroline said, closing her laptop with more force than necessary. The drive to Sophie's private school took 20 minutes through downtown traffic. Caroline used the time to call her mother in California, listening to gentle lectures about missing Sophie's childhood while building an empire that would outlast them both. Her mother meant well, but she didn't understand the weight of providing for a child alone, of building something substantial enough to ensure Sophie's future was secure. Sophie was indeed drawing when Caroline arrived, her small fingers moving colored pencils across paper with intense concentration. She was the only child left in the brightly decorated room, and Caroline's heart clenched at the familiar sight of her daughter's patient waiting. "Mommy." Sophie looked up with a smile that forgave everything. At 7 years old, she had inherited Caroline's dark hair and quick mind, but her trusting nature came from somewhere else entirely, perhaps from the father who had left when she was barely walking. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." The Hong Kong conference ran late. Caroline knelt beside her daughter's chair, studying the drawing. It showed a family of 4 standing in front of a house with a white picket fence. A father, mother, and 2 children holding hands under a smiling sun. "Who are these people?" Caroline asked gently. "Just a family," Sophie said, carefully coloring the father's shirt blue. "They look happy." Caroline helped Sophie pack her art supplies, swallowing questions she wasn't ready to answer. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that not all families look the same? That some mothers build companies instead of staying home? That some fathers choose to leave rather than stay and figure it out together? The flight from Chicago to Denver was Caroline's monthly journey to oversee her Colorado satellite office. She always booked first class, not for luxury, but for the ability to work undisturbed. Sophie curled up in the seat beside her, tablet loaded with educational games and movies for the 2-hour journey. Caroline had learned to travel efficiently with her daughter. Sophie was well-behaved on flights, accustomed to the routine of business travel. But tonight felt different. Sophie seemed restless, looking around the cabin with nervous energy Caroline hadn't seen before. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Caroline asked, minimizing her laptop screen. "I don't like flying when it's dark," Sophie admitted quietly. "What if we can't see where we're going?" "The pilots have special instruments," Caroline explained. "They can see everything they need to see." But as the plane taxied for takeoff, Sophie's anxiety grew visible. Her small hands gripped the armrests, and her breathing became shallow. Caroline felt helpless watching her daughter's distress. She had conquered boardrooms full of skeptical executives, had negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions. But she couldn't calm her own child's fears. The turbulence hit 20 minutes into the flight, and Sophie's composure cracked completely. Tears flowed as she pressed herself into Caroline's side, sobbing about crashes and falling from the sky. Other passengers began to notice, and Caroline felt the familiar weight of judgment from strangers who probably assumed she was a neglectful mother. "Shh, baby, it's okay," Caroline whispered, stroking Sophie's hair. But her words felt inadequate against her daughter's terror. That's when Captain David Sterling appeared in the aisle beside their seats. Caroline had noticed him during boarding, tall, calm, with graying temples and kind eyes. He wore his uniform with the easy confidence of someone who had spent years earning passenger trust. Now he knelt beside Sophie's seat with the gentle attention of a father who understood childhood fears. "Hey there," he said softly. "I'm Captain Sterling. I heard you might be worried about flying tonight." Sophie peeked at him through tear-dampened fingers. Something in his voice, patient, unrushed, genuinely caring, made her stop crying. "I'm scared," she whispered. "You know what?" David reached into his pocket and pulled out a cloth napkin. "Flying isn't scary once you understand how it works. Want me to show you something really cool about airplanes?" Caroline watched in amazement as this stranger began folding the napkin into precise creases, his hands steady and sure. Sophie's attention focused completely on his movements, her fear replaced by curiosity. "See, airplanes work just like this," David said, creating wings and angles with practiced ease. "The air moves over the wings in a special way that lifts us up, just like this." He launched the small paper airplane gently down the aisle. Sophie giggled as it sailed smoothly between the seats. "Can I try?" For the next 30 minutes, David taught Sophie the art of paper airplane construction. He showed her how different folds created different flight patterns, how weight and balance affected performance, how the same principles that kept their big airplane in the sky worked for tiny paper ones too. Caroline found herself crying. Not from stress or exhaustion, but from watching her daughter experience pure joy. Sophie was laughing, experimenting, asking questions with the fearless curiosity that Caroline remembered from her own childhood. And David answered every question with the patience of someone who genuinely loved children. Other passengers began to smile as paper airplanes drifted through the cabin. The flight attendants paused their service to watch the impromptu lesson. Even the businessman across the aisle put down his phone to enjoy the sweet interaction unfolding in seat 12A. "Why do you know so much about airplanes?" Sophie asked as she launched her fifth creation. "Well, I fly them for a living," David said with a smile. "But I also have a daughter about your age, and she taught me that the best way to stop being scared of something is to understand how it works." "You have a daughter?" Sophie's eyes lit up with interest. "I do. Her name is Zoe, and she loves making paper airplanes almost as much as she loves flying in real ones." Caroline listened to this exchange with growing amazement. When was the last time Sophie had shown such trust with a stranger? When had Caroline seen her daughter's face light up with such unguarded happiness? As the plane began its descent into Denver, David helped Sophie fold one last airplane, a complex design he called the Special. It was bigger than the others. With careful attention to weight distribution and aerodynamic details, "This one is for keeping," he told her. "Whenever you feel scared about flying, you can remember that airplanes are just big versions of this little one. They follow the same rules, and those rules keep us all safe up here." Sophie held the paper airplane like it was made of gold. "Thank you, Captain Sterling. You're really nice." "You're very welcome, Sophie. You're a natural pilot. Maybe someday you'll be flying planes instead of just riding in them." As David returned to the cockpit for landing preparations, Caroline felt a profound shift in her understanding of parenthood. She had just witnessed something she had never been able to give her daughter, the specific kind of comfort that came from a father's protective presence. The landing was smooth, and Sophie chatted excitedly about airplanes and flying as they gathered their belongings. Caroline found herself looking toward the cockpit, wishing she could thank the captain who had transformed her daughter's worst flight into her best one. But as they deplaned, Caroline hesitated. What could she possibly say? How do you thank someone for showing your child a kind of love you've never been able to provide? She watched David emerge from the cockpit, still in uniform, his flight bag slung over his shoulder. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable with responsibility, someone who took care of others as naturally as breathing. Their eyes met briefly in the jet bridge, and Caroline saw the same gentleness that had calmed Sophie's fears. For just a moment, she imagined what it might be like to have someone like that in their lives, someone who could fold paper airplanes and make everything feel safe. But the moment passed as other passengers pressed around them, and Caroline took Sophie's hand to navigate the busy terminal. They had a hotel reservation downtown, a morning full of meetings, and an afternoon flight back to Chicago. Their lives would return to normal, and Captain Sterling would remain a beautiful memory of unexpected kindness. Still, as they waited for their luggage, Sophie clutched her paper airplane and talked about the nice pilot who taught her not to be afraid. Caroline found herself hoping that someday, somehow, they might encounter that kind of gentle strength again. She didn't know that 20 feet away. David Sterling was thinking the same thing about the elegant woman whose eyes had shown such gratitude, and the little girl who reminded him why he had become a pilot in the first place, to help people feel safe in the sky. The flight had been routine until the storm clouds rolled in over the Rocky Mountains. David felt the familiar tension in his shoulders as he adjusted their altitude, seeking smoother air for his passengers. 20 minutes into the flight, turbulence began rattling the cabin with increasing intensity. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Sterling. We're experiencing some choppy air tonight due to weather patterns over the mountains. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We expect to be through this rough patch in about 15 minutes. David's calm voice over the intercom did little to ease the growing anxiety in seat 12A. Sophie had been fine during takeoff, even excited to see Captain Sterling again when she spotted him during the pre-flight safety demonstration. But now, with the plane bouncing through pockets of unstable air, her carefully maintained composure began to crack. Caroline looked up from her laptop as Sophie's breathing became rapid and shallow. "Sweetheart, remember what Captain Sterling taught you? The airplane is just like your paper plane, following the same rules, but logic couldn't compete with primal fear. Sophie's hands trembled as she gripped her mother's arm, her eyes wide with terror. "Mummy, we're going to crash. I can feel it shaking apart." The turbulence intensified, causing overhead bins to rattle and passengers to murmur with concern. Sophie's anxiety erupted into full panic. She began crying uncontrollably, her small body shaking with sobs that cut through the cabin noise. Other passengers turned to look, some with sympathy, others with the barely concealed irritation of travelers whose peace had been disrupted. Caroline felt her own panic rising. She had handled hostile takeovers and board revolts, but her daughter's terror left her completely helpless. Every soothing word felt inadequate. Every gentle touch seemed to make Sophie more agitated. "I want to get off," Sophie wailed, her voice carrying throughout the first-class cabin. "I want to get off right now." A businessman across the aisle sighed loudly and put on noise-cancelling headphones. The woman behind them whispered something to her companion about controlling your children in public. Caroline's cheeks burned with embarrassment. But her daughter's distress mattered more than strangers' opinions. "Sophie, honey, look at me," Caroline tried desperately. "We're safe. The pilots know what they're doing." But Sophie had crossed the threshold into complete panic. She was hyperventilating now, her face flushed and tear-streaked. In her lap, the carefully folded paper, airplane, from their previous flight, lay crumpled from her. Frightened grip, a torn drawing of stability that no longer provided comfort. The flight attendant approached with professional concern. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Caroline shook her head, feeling utterly defeated. She's terrified of flying, especially in bad weather. "I don't know what to do." That's when David appeared in the aisle. He had left the cockpit during a brief calm patch, trusting his co-pilot to maintain their course while he checked on passengers. The sound of Sophie's distress had drawn him straight to row 12, his paternal instincts overriding standard protocol. "Sophie!" His voice cut through her sobs with gentle authority. "Hey there, remember me?" Sophie looked up through her tears, recognition flickering in her frightened eyes. The sight of Captain Sterling, calm, confident, wearing the uniform that represented safety, began to slow her panicked breathing. "I remember you," she whispered. "You taught me about airplanes." David knelt in the aisle beside her seat, ignoring the curious stares of other passengers. His presence created an immediate sense of security, as if the chaos of the storm couldn't touch whatever space he occupied. "That's right. And do you remember what I told you about turbulence?" Sophie shook her head, too overwhelmed to recall their previous conversation. "I told you that turbulence is just the airplane's way of dancing with the wind," David said softly. "It feels scary, but it's actually the plane doing exactly what it's designed to do, staying safe in the sky." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a fresh napkin. "Want to make a new airplane while we dance with the wind? This one will be extra special because we're making it while we're actually flying." Sophie nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Caroline watched in amazement as David began folding the napkin with steady hands. His movements calm and precise, despite the plane's continued motion. "See how I'm making the folds, even when we're bouncing around?" David demonstrated each crease carefully. "That's because I know the airplane is going to keep us steady enough for what really matters. The bumps don't change the important things." As David worked, he began telling Sophie a story about his daughter Zoe's first scary flight. His voice had a hypnotic quality, drawing Sophie completely into his narrative and away from her fear. "Zoe was about your age when we hit some really bumpy air flying to visit her grandparents. She started crying just like you did, so I taught her a special breathing technique that all pilots use when things get rough." "What kind of breathing?" Sophie asked, her tears stopping as curiosity replaced terror. "It's called 4-count breathing," David explained, continuing to fold the napkin as he spoke. "We breathe in for 4 counts, hold it for 4 counts, then breathe out for 4 counts. It tricks your body into feeling calm, even when everything around you feels crazy." David demonstrated the technique, his chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. Sophie began to copy him, her panicked gasping gradually shifting to controlled, intentional breathing. "That's perfect," David encouraged. Now watch this airplane come together while you keep breathing like that." Caroline found herself breathing along with them, marveling at how this man could create such peace in the middle of chaos. She had spent years learning to project calm in high-pressure business situations, but David's serenity felt effortless and authentic. The airplane he was folding was more complex than the simple designs from their previous flight. This one had multiple wings and careful attention to balance, created with the precision of someone who understood both the science of flight and the psychology of fear. "Why are you making it so fancy?" Sophie asked, her voice now steady and curious. "Because this one has a special job," David replied. "This airplane is going to fly through our turbulence and show you that bumpy air can't stop something that's built right and knows where it's going." When he finished folding, David held up the completed airplane. It was elegant and sturdy, with clean lines that suggested both strength and grace. Sophie reached for it eagerly, her fear now completely replaced by wonder. "Ready to see some magic?" David asked. Sophie nodded enthusiastically. David stood up in the aisle and, timing his movement with the airplane's motion, launched the paper plane forward. It sailed smoothly down the aisle, riding the turbulence like a dancer moving with music rather than fighting against it. Passengers throughout the cabin turned to watch the small airplane's graceful flight. Smiles appeared on faces that had been tense with their own travel anxiety. Even the businessman who had put on headphones was now watching with interest. "How did it fly so straight when everything is bouncing around?" Sophie asked in amazement. "Because it was designed by someone who understands how things work up here," David explained. "Just like this big airplane we're riding in. The bumps feel scary, but they can't hurt us. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." The turbulence began to subside as they cleared the mountain weather system. David's timing had been perfect. By the time Sophie's new airplane came to rest several rows forward, the cabin had settled into smooth flight. "See?" David said gently. "The dancing is over. Now we get to glide all the way to Denver." Sophie beamed at him with the pure adoration children reserve for adults who truly understand them. "Will you teach me to make airplanes like that?" "I'd be honored to," David replied. "But first, I need to get back to the cockpit and make sure we have a perfectly smooth landing for you." As David prepared to return to his duties, Caroline found her voice. "Captain Sterling," she began, then stopped, unsure how to express the depth of her gratitude. "David," he said simply. "And you don't need to thank me. Taking care of passengers is what I do. But Sophie here is extra special. Not many people learn to be brave as fast as she did tonight." Sophie glowed with pride at his words. "I wasn't really brave. I was scared." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," David explained. "It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. And tonight, you chose to trust and learn instead of staying afraid. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." As David walked back toward the cockpit, Caroline watched her daughter carefully smooth out the paper airplane, treating it like a precious treasure. The transformation was remarkable. Sophie had gone from hysterical panic to confident curiosity in less than 30 minutes. "Mommy," Sophie said quietly, "I wish Captain Sterling could fly with us all the time." Caroline found herself wishing the same thing, though for reasons that went far beyond her daughter's fear of flying. She had just witnessed a kind of parenting she had never experienced, patient, wise, and completely focused on the child's emotional needs rather than external appearances or convenient solutions. The remainder of the flight passed peacefully. Sophie spent the time practicing her 4-count breathing and examining every detail of her new paper airplane. She asked Caroline questions about lift and drag, about wind currents and aircraft design, concepts she had never shown interest in before meeting David. As they began their descent into Denver, Sophie pressed her face to the window with excitement rather than fear. "Look, Mommy, I can see the lights getting bigger. We're really flying." Caroline realized that something fundamental had changed during this flight. It wasn't just that Sophie had overcome her fear of turbulence. Her daughter had discovered that scary situations could become learning opportunities, that strong adults could be trusted to provide safety and wisdom. and that sometimes the best way through difficulty was to understand it rather than simply endure it. These were lessons Caroline had never learned to teach, insights that came naturally to David Sterling but felt foreign to her own experience of motherhood. As the plane touched down smoothly on the Denver runway, Sophie clapped with delight. "That was the best landing ever." Caroline smiled, knowing that this flight had indeed been a landing of sorts, not just their arrival in Colorado, but her daughter's arrival at a new understanding of what it meant to feel protected and guided by someone who truly cared about her well-being. That the question that troubled Caroline as they prepared to deplane was simple but profound. How do you go back to ordinary life after witnessing the extraordinary? The Denver airport terminal buzzed with late-night travelers rushing to their gates, but Caroline felt suspended in an unusual moment of uncertainty. Sophie walked beside her, carefully protecting the paper airplane David had created during their turbulent flight, her earlier fear now replaced by excited chatter about everything she had learned. "Can we find Captain Sterling to say goodbye?" Sophie asked as they approached the gate area, her eyes bright with hope. Caroline's heart skipped at the suggestion. She had been thinking the same thing, but hadn't known how to suggest it without appearing too forward. "We could look for him, sweetheart, though he might be busy with his pilot duties." They found themselves lingering near the gate as other passengers gathered their belongings and hurried toward baggage claim. Caroline scanned the crowd for David's distinctive tall frame, her business card growing warm from her nervous grip. She had pulled it from her wallet impulsively, though she wasn't entirely sure why. When David finally appeared from the jet bridge, he looked pleasantly tired but satisfied. His crisp uniform remained professional despite the challenging flight, and he carried his flight bag with the quiet confidence of someone who had safely delivered his passengers through difficult weather. Caroline found herself admiring his composed demeanor. There was something deeply reassuring about his competence. "Captain Sterling," Sophie called out, waving her precious paper airplane above her head like a flag. David's expression immediately brightened when he spotted them waiting. He approached with the same patient manner that had transformed Sophie's panic into wonder, though Caroline noticed his gaze included her with genuine warmth. "How's our brave flyer doing?" he asked Sophie, crouching down to meet her at eye level. "I'm not scared of flying anymore," Sophie declared with 7-year-old conviction. "And I practiced the special breathing 4 times. Want to see how good I got?" David listened with complete attention as Sophie demonstrated her 4-count breathing technique, offering encouragement with the kind of focused respect that most adults reserved for other adults. Caroline watched this interaction with growing appreciation. When had anyone taken her daughter's accomplishments this seriously? "You're going to be a natural pilot," David told Sophie sincerely. "With skills like that, you could probably handle any kind of weather." "Really? Will you teach me more about airplanes sometime?" Sophie asked with innocent directness. Caroline felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "Sophie, Captain Sterling has his own family to get home to. We shouldn't impose—" "Actually," David said gently, rising to address Caroline directly, "I'd be honored to answer any questions she might have. Sharing the love of flying with young people is one of my favorite parts of this job." Their eyes met across Sophie's head, and Caroline experienced something she hadn't felt in years, the possibility of genuine connection with someone who understood what children truly needed. David's interest seemed entirely focused on Sophie's well-being rather than any recognition of Caroline's professional status, which he clearly hadn't identified. "I have something for you," Caroline said suddenly, pulling her business card from her pocket. The elegant cardstock felt heavy between her fingers as she extended it toward David. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did tonight." Sophie hasn't been that calm on a flight since, well, maybe ever. David accepted the card with polite curiosity, glancing at it briefly before tucking it into his shirt pocket without obvious recognition of her corporate significance. Caroline felt both relieved and slightly deflated that her professional achievements meant nothing in this context. "You don't need to thank me," David said sincerely. "But I appreciate the thought. Sophie's a special little girl. She just needed someone to show her that flying could be fun instead of frightening. How did you know exactly what to do? Caroline found herself asking. I felt so helpless watching her panic. I have an 8-year-old daughter, David replied simply. Fear is fear, whether it's about flying or monsters under the bed or starting a new school. Sometimes kids just need an adult to take their feelings seriously and show them a different way to think about things. Caroline nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his approach while feeling slightly inadequate about her own parenting instincts. Your daughter is lucky to have you. Actually, I'm the lucky one, David said with a self-deprecating smile. Zoe teaches me something new every day about what's really important. The conversation felt natural and easy, but Caroline was acutely aware that they were standing in a busy airport terminal with Sophie listening to every word. This wasn't the place for the deeper conversation she found herself wanting to have with this man, who seemed to understand children so intuitively. We should probably head to our hotel, Caroline said reluctantly. Sophie has school on Friday, and we have an early flight back to Chicago. Of course, David replied, but Caroline thought she detected a similar reluctance in his voice. Have a safe trip home. As they began to part ways, Sophie suddenly grabbed David's hand. Wait, I want to give you something. She carefully tore a small corner from her paper airplane, just enough to write on without damaging its flight capability. With her mother's pen, she wrote in careful 7-year-old handwriting, "Thank you for teaching me to be brave. Love, Sophie." David accepted the small piece of paper with the solemnity of someone receiving a precious gift. This is perfect, Sophie. I'll keep it in my flight bag so it can remind me to be brave too. You need to be reminded to be brave? Sophie asked with surprise. But you're a pilot. Everyone needs reminding sometimes, David said gently. Even grown-ups get scared. The important thing is having people who care about us to help us remember how strong we really are. Caroline felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. When was the last time someone had spoken to Sophie with such respect for her intelligence and feelings? When had anyone treated her daughter's thoughts as genuinely valuable rather than simply cute? As they finally separated, David toward the crew parking area, Caroline and Sophie toward ground transportation, Caroline found herself looking back over her shoulder. David was doing the same thing, and their eyes met one more time across the busy terminal. "Mummy," Sophie said as they settled into their taxi, "I really like Captain Sterling." "I can tell, sweetheart. He was very kind to you. Are we ever going to see him again?" Caroline stared out the taxi window at Denver's city lights, considering her daughter's question. Their lives were in Chicago. David's were presumably here in Denver, or wherever pilots lived when they weren't flying. The chances of their paths crossing again seemed slim. "I don't know, Sophie. Sometimes we meet wonderful people just for a little while, and that's okay too. We can be grateful for the time we had." But even as she spoke these sensible words, Caroline found herself hoping they weren't true. Something about David Sterling's gentle strength had awakened a longing she had buried years ago, not just for romance, though she couldn't deny the attraction, but for partnership in the work of raising a child. She pulled his business card from her purse and studied it in the taxi's dim light. Captain David Sterling, Senior Pilot, Mountain West Airlines. A Denver address and phone number. Simple, professional, with no hint of the warmth and wisdom she had witnessed tonight. Sophie fell asleep against Caroline's shoulder during the ride to their hotel, still holding her paper airplane. Caroline watched her daughter's peaceful face and made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. Tomorrow, after their business meetings, she would find a way to contact David Sterling. Not for any dramatic romantic gesture, but simply to continue a conversation that felt unfinished. Sophie deserved to maintain a connection with someone who understood her so well, and Caroline, if she was being honest, wanted to learn more about the kind of parenting that came so naturally to this patient, thoughtful man. The taxi pulled up to their hotel, and Caroline gently woke Sophie to walk inside. As they rode the elevator to their floor, Sophie looked up with sleepy eyes. "Mommy, do you think Captain Sterling likes us?" Caroline smiled, thinking of the way David's eyes had softened when he looked at both of them. "I think he does, sweetheart. I think he likes us very much. And for the first time in years." Caroline went to sleep wondering what it might be like to be part of something bigger than just her and Sophie, a family that included someone who knew how to fold paper airplanes and teach children to be brave. Caroline stared at her laptop screen, but the quarterly revenue reports blurred together as her mind wandered back to the airport conversation 3 days ago. David's business card sat beside her coffee cup, its simple white surface somehow more compelling than the stack of corporate documents awaiting her signature. Sophie had talked about Captain Sterling non-stop since their return to Chicago. Every conversation somehow circled back to paper airplanes, 4-count breathing, or questions about how jet engines worked. Caroline had fielded inquiries about lift coefficients over breakfast and wing design during bedtime stories. Her daughter's newfound fascination with aviation was both endearing and slightly overwhelming. "Mommy," Sophie said, appearing in Caroline's home office doorway with a crayon drawing in her hands. "I made this for Captain Sterling. Can we send it to him?" Caroline examined the artwork, a careful rendering of their airplane with Sophie and David visible through tiny windows, both smiling broadly. At the bottom, Sophie had written in her best handwriting, "Thank you for teaching me to be brave. It's beautiful." "Sweetheart," Caroline said, her heart squeezing at her daughter's innocent desire to maintain this connection. "But we don't have Captain Sterling's address." "You have his card," Sophie pointed out with 7-year-old logic. "It has his name on it." Caroline picked up the business card, turning it over in her fingers. "Mountain West Airlines, Denver, Colorado." It would be simple enough to find David through the airline's corporate directory. Too simple, perhaps. What seemed natural and sweet from a child's perspective felt potentially complicated from an adult's. "Please, Mommy." Sophie's eyes held the same hope Caroline had seen during their conversation with David. "I want to tell him I'm not scared of flying anymore." Looking at her daughter's earnest face, Caroline made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. "Okay, we'll send your drawing to the airline, and they can make sure Captain Sterling receives it." Sophie's delighted squeal echoed through the quiet house as she ran to find more art supplies. "I'm going to make him the best thank you card ever." That evening, Caroline helped Sophie compose a letter to accompany her drawing. They worked together at the kitchen table, Sophie dictating her thoughts while Caroline translated them into proper sentences on elegant stationery. "Dear Captain Sterling," Sophie began. "This is Sophie from the airplane where you taught me about paper planes. I wanted you to know that I flew home without being scared at all. I used the 4-count breathing and it worked perfectly. My mommy says you're very good at helping children feel safe, and I think your daughter Zoe is lucky to have you. I drew you a picture of us flying together because that was the best part of my whole trip. Thank you for being so nice to me. Love, Sophie." Caroline added her own note below Sophie's message. "Captain Sterling, I cannot adequately express how grateful I am for your kindness to Sophie during our flight. Your patience and wisdom transformed what could have been a traumatic experience into a joyful learning opportunity. Sophie hasn't stopped talking about your paper airplane lessons, and I find myself amazed by how much she learned in those few minutes with you. If you're ever in Chicago and have time, Sophie would love to show you the aviation books we've been reading together. With sincere appreciation, Caroline Blake." As Caroline sealed the envelope, she hesitated. Was she being too forward by suggesting a future meeting? Would David think she had ulterior motives beyond Sophie's innocent gratitude? But then she remembered the way David had looked at both of them in the airport, with genuine warmth and what seemed like reluctance to say goodbye. Perhaps he would welcome continued contact. Perhaps she was overthinking what should be a simple expression of thanks. 10 days later, Caroline's assistant knocked on her office door. "Miss Blake, there's a package for you from Denver. Personal delivery, not business mail." Caroline's pulse quickened as she accepted the small manila envelope. Her name was written in neat handwriting across the front, with no corporate letterhead or official markings. Inside, she found a photograph and a handwritten note. The photo showed a young girl with bright eyes and a mischievous smile standing beside a small airplane made from construction paper and tape. The aircraft was painted in cheerful colors and decorated with tiny windows and doors. On the wings, someone had written Sophie's inspiration in careful block letters. David's note was written on simple notebook paper. Dear Sophie and Caroline, thank you for the wonderful drawing and letter. Sophie, I showed your picture to my daughter Zoe, and she was so excited to meet another young pilot that she insisted on building this special airplane for you. She painted it in the colors she thinks you would choose, and added some improvements to the design we learned together. Zoe wanted me to tell you that she hopes you'll write to her about your flying adventures. She's never had a pen pal who understands about paper airplanes. Caroline, your gratitude means more than you know. It's parents like you who remind me why I love working with families. If you're serious about that Chicago invitation, Zoe and I would be honored to visit sometime. We don't travel much outside of work, but Sophie sounds like the kind of friend Zoe needs. Please tell Sophie that she's officially my co-pilot whenever she flies with Mountain West Airlines. With warm regards, David Sterling and Zoe Sterling, age 8, aspiring pilot. Caroline read the note twice, her heart warming at David's genuine response. This wasn't polite corporate courtesy. This was real human connection, the kind she rarely experienced in her high-powered business world. Mommy! Sophie burst into the office after school, immediately spotting the package on Caroline's desk. Is that from Captain Sterling? It's from Captain Sterling and his daughter Zoe, Caroline confirmed, watching Sophie's eyes widen with delight. When Sophie saw the handmade airplane with her name painted on the wings, she gasped with pure joy. She made this just for me? A real pilot made me my own airplane. Zoe is 8 years old, like you'll be next month, Caroline explained. She wants to be a pilot like her father, and she thinks you'd make a good pen pal. Can I write to her right now? Sophie bounced with excitement. I want to tell her about all the airplane books we've been reading and ask her what it's like to have a pilot daddy. Carolyn smiled, realizing that what had started as a simple thank you note had blossomed into something richer, a friendship between children that might bridge the gap between their very different worlds. That night, as Sophie carefully composed her first letter to Zoe Sterling, Caroline found herself drafting her own response to David. She wrote about Sophie's continued enthusiasm for aviation, about the way their brief encounter had opened her daughter's mind to new possibilities, and about her own gratitude for meeting someone who understood that children's feelings deserved respect and attention. She also found herself writing about loneliness, not explicitly, but in the spaces between her words, about the challenge of single parenthood, about the weight of making every decision alone, about the rare gift of meeting another adult who seemed to share her values about what children needed to thrive. When she sealed both letters, Sophie's colorful creation for Zoe and her own more careful communication for David, Caroline felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the anticipation of genuine friendship with someone who understood her life's most important priority. She had no way of knowing that in Denver, David Sterling was experiencing the same hopeful uncertainty as he sealed his own response, or that their children's innocent pen-pal relationship was about to become the foundation for something neither adult had dared to imagine. The elegant birthday invitation lay on David's kitchen counter like a bridge between two worlds. Printed on heavy cream cardstock with gold embossing, it read, Sophie Blake cordially invites you to celebrate her 8th birthday. Below the formal script, Sophie had added her own handwritten note in purple crayon. Please come, Captain Sterling. Zoe, too. We're going to have the best party ever. David studied the invitation for the 3rd time that morning, noting the Lincoln Park address that suggested wealth far beyond his modest pilot's salary. Over the past month, his correspondence with Caroline had revealed glimpses of her professional success, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of her circumstances. Daddy, are we really going to Sophie's party? 8-year-old Zoe appeared beside him, already dressed in her favorite sundress. The blue one with tiny airplanes printed on the fabric. Are you sure you want to? David asked gently. It might be different from the parties you're used to. Zoe looked at him with the directness that children possess before the world teaches them to be cautious. Sophie's my pen pal. Of course I want to go to her party. Their correspondence over the past weeks had delighted both girls. Zoe had written enthusiastically about helping David with pre-flight inspections, about the view from the cockpit during sunrise flights, about her dreams of becoming the first female captain at Mountain West Airlines. Sophie had responded with equal excitement, describing her new aviation books, her improved performance during a recent flight to visit her grandmother, and her mother's promise to take her to the Museum of Science and Industry's aviation exhibit. But it was Caroline's letters to David that had surprised him most. Her writing revealed a thoughtful, introspective woman who struggled with the same parenting doubts that kept him awake some nights. She wrote about the challenge of balancing career demands with Sophie's needs, about the loneliness of making every decision alone, about the rare gift of meeting another single parent who understood the weight of that responsibility. David found himself looking forward to her letters with an anticipation that went beyond polite correspondence. Caroline's insights into Sophie's emotional development, her questions about his own experiences with Zoe, and her genuine interest in his perspectives on parenting had created an intimacy that surprised him with its depth. I think we should go, David decided, folding the invitation carefully. But remember, Sophie's family lives very differently than we do. Their house might be bigger, their party fancier. That doesn't make them better or worse than us, just different. Zoe nodded solemnly, though David wasn't sure an 8-year-old could fully grasp the class differences they were about to navigate. The drive to Lincoln Park took them through increasingly affluent neighborhoods until David found himself turning into the circular driveway of an impressive brick mansion. Manicured gardens surrounded a house that could have accommodated 4 families his size, and expensive cars filled the street where other party guests had parked. Wow, Zoe breathed, pressing her face to the passenger window. It's like a palace. David felt his own intimidation rising as they approached the front door. He had grown up in a middle-class military family, had built his career through hard work and dedication rather than inherited advantage. The casual wealth displayed in this neighborhood felt foreign and slightly overwhelming, but when Caroline opened the door, her genuine smile immediately eased his anxiety. She looked beautiful in a simple green dress that highlighted her dark hair, but what struck David most was the relief in her eyes, as if his presence solved some problem he hadn't known existed. David! Zoe, I'm so glad you could come, Caroline said, kneeling to Zoe's level. Sophie has been talking about meeting you all week. Is she really my pen pal? Zoe asked with shy excitement. She certainly is. And she has something very special to show you. Caroline led them through a foyer decorated with fresh flowers and expensive artwork, past a living room filled with elegantly dressed adults holding crystal glasses. David noticed how several guests glanced at him with polite curiosity, clearly trying to place the casually dressed pilot among Caroline's usual social circle. The backyard had been transformed into what looked like a professional party venue. White tents provided shade over elaborately decorated tables. A hired DJ played age-appropriate music, and entertainers dressed as fairy tale characters led organized games for the dozen children in attendance. David felt increasingly out of place until he spotted Sophie running toward them with unbridled joy. Zoe, you came. Sophie threw her arms around her pen pal as if they were long-lost sisters rather than new friends. Come see everything. We have a bounce house and face painting and a real magician. Watching the girls' immediate connection, David relaxed slightly. Whatever differences existed between the adults' worlds, the children saw only friendship and shared excitement. Can I get you something to drink? Caroline asked, gesturing toward a bar area staffed by uniformed servers. Coffee, wine, something stronger? I know this probably feels overwhelming. Her acknowledgement of his discomfort was both embarrassing and touching. Coffee would be great. And this is lovely. Sophie looks incredibly happy. They move toward a quieter corner of the patio where they could watch the children while talking privately. David noticed how Caroline's shoulders relaxed once they were away from her other guests, as if she too felt more comfortable on the margins of this elaborate celebration. "I have to confess something," Caroline said as they settled into chairs overlooking the garden. "I usually hire event planners for Sophie's parties, but this year I wanted to do more myself, to make it more personal. I think I may have overcompensated." David looked around at the obviously expensive entertainment, the catered food, the hired staff managing every detail. "It's certainly memorable. That's a diplomatic way of saying it's excessive," Caroline laughed, and David was charmed by her self-awareness. "I was going to say impressive. But since you brought up excessive, why did you feel like you needed to do all this?" Carolyn was quiet for a moment, watching Sophie and Zoe giggle together as they waited in line for face painting. "I suppose I wanted to prove something. To myself, maybe. That I could create magical childhood experiences. Even though I work too much and travel constantly and sometimes feel like I'm failing at the most important job in the world." Her honesty caught David off guard. In his experience, wealthy people rarely admitted to insecurity or doubt. Caroline's vulnerability made her seem both more human and more attractive. "You know what I think?" David said carefully. "I think Sophie will remember this party, not because of the bounce house or the magician, but because her mother cared enough to plan something special for her. The rest is just decoration. Do you really believe that?" "I know it. Look at her. She's not paying attention to any of the expensive entertainment. She's completely focused on playing with Zoe. That's what matters to her." Caroline followed his gaze to where the girls were now attempting to teach each other complicated hand-clapping games, their laughter carrying across the yard above the professional entertainment. "How do you always know exactly the right thing to say about children?" Caroline asked. "I don't," David replied honestly. "I just try to remember what mattered to me when I was their age. And what mattered wasn't how much money my parents spent. It was whether they showed up and paid attention and made me feel loved." Their conversation was interrupted by Sophie running over with Zoe in tow, both girls sporting elaborate butterfly face paintings. "Daddy, look! We're twins now," Zoe announced, spinning to show off her colorful wings. "Can we show Zoe my room?" Sophie asked Caroline. "I want her to see my aviation book collection." Caroline glanced at David for permission, and he nodded. As the girls raced toward the house, David found himself alone with Caroline for the first time since the airport. "Thank you," Caroline said quietly. "For what?" "For coming today. For bringing Zoe. For making Sophie happier than I've seen her in months. For reminding me what really matters." David looked at this accomplished, beautiful woman who had created an empire but still doubted her ability to make her daughter smile, and felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that perhaps they were both searching for the same thing. "Thank you for inviting us," he replied. "This might be the beginning of something really special." Neither of them was talking only about their daughter's friendship. 3 weeks after Sophie's birthday party, David's phone rang during his pre-flight checklist routine. Caroline's name on the caller ID immediately shifted his attention from instrument readings to something more personal. "David, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." Caroline's voice carried an unusual tension that put him on alert. "Never a bad time for you," he said, settling back in the pilot's seat. "What's going on?" "It's Sophie's school. They're having a science fair next Friday, and all the children are supposed to present projects about flight and aerodynamics. Sophie insisted her project had to be about paper airplanes because Captain Sterling taught her everything about flying." David smiled at that. "She's been writing to Zoe about her experiments with different paperweights and wing angles. Sounds like she's becoming quite the engineer. That's just it. She knows more than I do now. When I try to help with her project, I feel completely useless. She keeps asking questions I can't answer, and I can see her getting frustrated with my ignorance." David heard the self-doubt in Caroline's voice and recognized the familiar weight of single-parent inadequacy. What kind of questions? Yesterday she wanted to know why some paper airplanes turn left while others fly straight. This morning she asked about the relationship between nose weight and flight distance. I tried looking things up online, but Sophie could tell I was just reading from websites. She needs someone who understands the science behind the magic, David said thoughtfully. Exactly. And I was wondering, Caroline paused, and David could hear her gathering courage for whatever came next. Would you consider coming to Chicago to help her with the project? I know it's a lot to ask, and I'd pay for your flight and hotel, of course. But Sophie lights up when she talks about aviation, and I think you're the only person who can help her create something truly special. David felt something warm settle in his chest at her request. Not because of the implied trust in his expertise, but because Caroline was putting Sophie's needs above any awkwardness about asking for help. You don't need to pay for anything, he said firmly. I have buddy passes, and Zoe would love an excuse to visit Chicago. When would you need us? Really? You'd do that? The relief in Caroline's voice was palpable. Caroline, Sophie is important to me. You both are. If she needs help with her project, then of course I'll come. The silence that followed his words carried weight. Neither of them was ready to acknowledge fully. The easy friendship of their letters and phone calls had gradually deepened into something more complicated, and David's declaration made that shift impossible to ignore. Thank you, Caroline said quietly. This means more than you know. 2 days later, David and Zoe arrived at O'Hare Airport carrying a suitcase full of aviation supplies and hearts full of anticipation. Caroline and Sophie met them at the gate, and the reunion felt more like coming home than visiting friends. Sophie threw herself into Zoe's arms with the enthusiasm of sisters reuniting after a long separation. The girls immediately began chattering about their correspondence, their shared excitement over the science project, and their plans for Zoe's visit to Chicago. Caroline greeted David with a hug that lasted just long enough to suggest their relationship had moved beyond polite friendship. I can't tell you how grateful I am, she whispered against his ear. Happy to help, David replied, breathing in the subtle scent of her perfume and realizing how much he had missed her presence. They drove through Chicago's downtown traffic toward Caroline's Lincoln Park home, the girls maintaining constant conversation in the back seat while the adults navigated the comfortable intimacy that had developed through weeks of letters and phone calls. How's work been? Caroline asked as they stopped at a red light. Busy, but good. I've been thinking about your suggestion regarding the training captain position. The promotion would mean more time at home with Zoe, less overnight flights. That sounds perfect for both of you. It would also mean more stability if David stopped himself before completing the thought. If I wanted to pursue something more serious with someone in Chicago, if I wanted to build a life that could accommodate 2 families, becoming one. Caroline glanced at him curiously, but their arrival at her house prevented further conversation. David noticed how natural it felt to walk into her home, how easily he moved through spaces that had felt overwhelming during his first visit. Familiarity had replaced intimidation, and something deeper was taking root. They spent the afternoon in Caroline's spacious kitchen, transforming it into an aviation laboratory. David had brought materials for constructing multiple paper airplane designs, along with measuring tools and notebooks for recording experimental data. The key to good science, David explained to both girls, is asking specific questions and testing them systematically. Sophie nodded seriously, her notebook ready for taking notes. I want to know why some airplanes fly farther than others with the same throwing force. Excellent question. What do you think might affect flight distance? Weight? Sophie suggested. Wing shape? Zoe added. Both good hypotheses. Let's design experiments to test them. Caroline watched from the kitchen island as David guided the girls through the scientific method. His patience was remarkable. He never rushed their thinking or provided answers before they had chance to work through problems themselves. When they made mistakes, he helped them understand what went wrong without making them feel foolish. You're incredible with them, Caroline said quietly during a moment when the girls were focused on folding test airplanes. They make it easy. David replied. "They're genuinely curious, and they listen to each other's ideas. That's more than you get from most adults." Caroline felt a familiar flutter watching David work with the children. His natural teaching ability, combined with his obvious affection for both girls, created a warmth she had never experienced in her own childhood. Her parents had loved her, but they had never engaged with her interests the way David engaged with Sophie and Zoe's questions. That evening, after documenting flight distances for 12 different airplane designs and creating detailed charts of their results, the girls sprawled on the living room floor to plan Sophie's presentation. "I think you should wear pilot wings when you present." Zoe suggested seriously, "Do you think Captain Sterling would let me borrow some?" "I have extras," David said, pulling a set of wings from his flight bag. "These are yours to keep." Sophie accepted the wings with the reverence of someone receiving a sacred honor. Caroline watched her daughter pin them carefully to her shirt and felt her throat tighten with emotion. Later, after the girls had gone to bed, Zoe in the guest room, Sophie in her own bed, but only after extracting promises that Zoe would still be there in the morning, Caroline and David found themselves alone in her kitchen. "Wine?" Caroline offered, though she already knew David preferred coffee in the evenings. "Actually, wine sounds good tonight," he said, settling onto a bar stool at her kitchen island. Caroline opened a bottle of Cabernet, hyper-aware of David's presence in her domestic space. Having him here felt both natural and momentous, as if they were crossing invisible lines that would be difficult to uncross. "I need to tell you something," Caroline said as she poured their wine. "Sophie's been asking questions about you." "About us?" David's hand stilled on his glass. "What kind of questions?" "She wanted to know if you were going to be her new daddy." Caroline felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I told her that adults can be special friends without getting married, but I don't think she believed me." "What did you tell her about what we are to each other?" Caroline met his eyes across the counter. "I told her I didn't know yet." The honesty in her voice hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they were ready to cross. David set down his wine and moved around the island until he was standing directly in front of her. "I don't know either," he said softly, "but I know I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. And I know that watching you with the girls tonight, seeing how happy Sophie is when we're all together, it feels like something I want to protect and nurture." Caroline's breath caught as David reached up to touch her face gently. "The girls aren't the only ones who've been asking questions," she admitted. "I've been wondering what it would be like to have a partner in this. Someone who understands that the children come first, but who also wants something meaningful for himself. Is that what you want? Something meaningful with me?" Instead of answering with words, Caroline stepped closer and kissed him. It was a gentle kiss, full of possibility and careful hope. When they separated, both were smiling. "I think," Caroline said quietly, "we might be in trouble." "Good trouble?" David asked. "The very best kind." The legal document arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail, while Caroline was helping Sophie practice her science fair presentation. The return address showed the law offices of Hartman and Associates, but Caroline didn't recognize the firm name. She signed for the envelope absently, her attention focused on Sophie's confident explanation of aerodynamic principles. "Mommy, you're not listening," Sophie complained, holding up a perfectly folded paper airplane. "I need you to time my flight distances for the final measurements." "Sorry, sweetheart." "Go ahead. I'm timing now." Caroline set the legal envelope aside and focused on her daughter's enthusiastic demonstration. Sophie had transformed from a frightened flyer into a passionate aviation student, and her science project reflected weeks of careful experimentation with David's guidance. It wasn't until after Sophie left for school that Caroline opened the legal document. The first line made her sink into her kitchen chair with shock. "Petition for parental rights and custody modification. Marcus Webb versus Caroline Blake." Marcus Webb, Sophie's biological father, who had walked out when Sophie was 18 months old and hadn't made contact since. Caroline's hands shook as she read the formal legal language demanding immediate visitation rights and requesting joint custody of the minor child, Sophie Blake. The petition painted Caroline as an unfit mother who prioritized career over family, citing her frequent business travel and recent involvement with unknown male companions as evidence of instability in Sophie's home environment. The unknown male companion reference could only mean David, though Caroline couldn't imagine how Marcus had learned about their developing relationship. Her phone rang, startling her from the document's devastating implications. David's name on the caller ID usually made her smile, but today it sent panic through her system. "Good morning, beautiful." David's warm voice carried clearly through the phone. "How did Sophie's final practice session go?" "David, we have a problem," Caroline said, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. A big one. The tone change was so abrupt that David immediately shifted into crisis mode. "What's happened? Is Sophie okay?" "Sophie's fine, but..." Caroline took a shaking breath. "Her biological father has filed for custody. He wants visitation rights, and he's using our relationship as evidence that I'm providing an unstable environment." The silence that followed stretched long enough for Caroline to wonder if the call had dropped. "David, are you there?" "I'm here," he said quietly. "Tell me everything." Caroline read through the legal petition, her voice breaking as she described Marcus's claims about her parenting failures. The man who had abandoned their daughter before she could walk was now presenting himself as a concerned father, seeking to protect his child from her mother's poor judgment. "How did he even know about us?" Caroline asked. "We've been so careful around Sophie, and it's not like our relationship is public knowledge." "Private investigators," David said grimly. "If he's serious about this custody challenge, he would have hired someone to document your personal life. Airport security cameras, restaurant photos, hotel registrations. It's not hard to build a case if you know what you're looking for." Caroline felt sick. The happiness she had found with David was being weaponized against her own daughter. "What am I going to do? I can't lose Sophie, David. She's everything to me." "You're not going to lose her," David said with quiet conviction. "But we need to be smart about this. What does your lawyer say?" "I haven't called anyone yet. I just opened the documents an hour ago." "Call your attorney immediately." "And Caroline," David paused, and she could hear him choosing his words carefully. "You need to know that this might complicate things between us. If Marcus is using our relationship against you, the easiest solution might be for me to step back until the custody issues are resolved." "No." Caroline's response was immediate and fierce. "I won't let him control my life by threatening to take Sophie. If he thinks he can manipulate me by attacking the people I care about, he's wrong, even if it puts Sophie at risk." The question hung between them like a sword. Caroline closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Choose David and potentially give Marcus more ammunition for his custody case. Choose to protect herself legally and lose the first real happiness she had found in years. "I need time to think," she said finally. "And I need to talk to Sophie. She deserves to know what's happening before some stranger in a courtroom starts making decisions about her life." "Do you want me to come to Chicago?" "I can be there tonight." Caroline's heart ached at his offer. Yes, she wanted David there. She wanted his steady presence and calm wisdom. But she also knew that his arrival would be documented by whatever private investigator Marcus had hired, adding more fuel to the custody challenge. "Not yet," she said reluctantly. "Let me talk to my lawyers first and figure out what we're really dealing with." After ending the call, Caroline sat in her empty kitchen, staring at the legal documents that threatened to destroy everything she had built. Sophie's laughter from that morning echoed in her memory. Her daughter's joy in sharing aviation knowledge she had learned from David, her excitement about presenting her science project, her innocent questions about whether David might become part of their family permanently. Caroline's phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Mummy, I forgot my lunch money. Can you bring it to school?" The normalcy of the request broke Caroline's heart. In a few hours, She would have to explain to her 8-year-old daughter that a father she didn't remember wanted to upend their life together. She would have to prepare Sophie for court proceedings, custody evaluations, and the possibility that their carefully constructed world might be torn apart. Caroline drove to Sophie's school in a daze, delivering the lunch money and watching her daughter run back to class with the carefree energy of a child who still believed her mother could fix any problem. That faith felt both precious and terrifying. Her attorney, Patricia Holmes, could see Caroline immediately after reviewing the custody petition. Patricia was a family law specialist who had handled Caroline's divorce from Marcus years earlier, and her grim expression confirmed Caroline's worst fears. "This is a nuisance suit designed to cause maximum disruption," Patricia said after reviewing the documents. "Marcus doesn't really want custody of Sophie. He wants to hurt you. The question is why now and what he hopes to gain. Money?" Caroline suggested. "Possibly. Or revenge. Has anything changed in your life recently that might have triggered this response?" Caroline thought about her growing relationship with David, the happiness she had been allowing herself to feel, the possibility that she might have found someone to share the responsibilities of parenthood. "I've been seeing someone," she admitted, "a pilot I met on a flight with Sophie. It's become serious recently." Patricia nodded as if this confirmed her suspicions. "Marcus is betting that you'll choose to protect your relationship over fighting for custody. He's assuming you'll settle out of court to avoid negative publicity that might affect your business or your personal life." "He's wrong," Caroline said flatly. "I'll fight him with everything I have." "Good, because that's exactly what we need to do." "But Caroline," Patricia's expression grew more serious, "you need to understand that family court judges are conservative about custody changes. If Marcus can demonstrate that Sophie's living situation has become less stable, or that you're prioritizing romantic relationships over parenting, it could influence their decision. Are you telling me to break up with David? I'm telling you to be very careful about how you handle this relationship while the custody case is pending. Every interaction will be scrutinized. Every public appearance will be documented. Every choice you make will be evaluated through the lens of what's best for Sophie." Caroline left the law office feeling trapped between impossible choices. Fight for her daughter and risk losing the man she was falling in love with, or protect her relationship and potentially give Marcus leverage in his custody challenge. That evening, she sat Sophie down for the most difficult conversation of her parenting life. "Sweetheart, I need to tell you about something important. Do you remember me mentioning your biological father?" Sophie's face scrunched with confusion. "The man who left when I was little?" "Yes, well, he's contacted us through lawyers, and he says he wants to spend time with you." "Why?" Sophie's question was direct and matter-of-fact. "He doesn't even know me. I don't know why, baby. But there might be court meetings where adults talk about what's best for you. I want you to know that no matter what happens, I love you more than anything in the world. And I will never stop fighting to keep you safe and happy." Sophie was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the seriousness of a child forced to grow up too quickly. "Does this have anything to do with Captain Sterling?" she asked finally. Caroline's breath caught. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you've been sad since he called this morning, and you keep looking at your phone like you want to call him back, but you're scared to." The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze Caroline. Sophie had intuited the connection between Marcus's custody challenge and David's potential role in their lives. "It might," Caroline admitted carefully. "Some adults think that when a mummy has a special friend, it changes how she takes care of her children. But that's not true, is it? You know that loving Captain Sterling doesn't make me love you any less." "I know that," Sophie said firmly. "You love me the same amount as always. You just smile more now." Caroline pulled her daughter into her arms, fighting back tears. "Whatever happens with these court meetings, I need you to remember that. You are the most important thing in my life. Everything I do is to protect you and keep you happy. Are you going to stop seeing Captain Sterling?" "I don't know yet, sweetheart. It's complicated. Sophie pulled back to look directly into Caroline's eyes. "Mommy, Captain Sterling makes you happy. And he makes me happy too. If that man who left us tries to make you choose between being happy and keeping me, that's not fair," from the mouth of babes. Caroline hugged Sophie tighter, knowing that her 8-year-old daughter had just articulated the heart of their impossible situation. The custody battle that would determine their future had begun, and Caroline had no idea how to win a fight where choosing happiness for herself might be seen as abandoning her responsibility to her child. The courthouse family evaluation room felt sterile. Despite its child-friendly decorations, Dr. Angela Martinez, the court-appointed psychologist, had kind eyes, but maintained professional distance as Sophie prepared to meet her biological father for the first time in almost 7 years. Marcus Webb entered with his attorney, looking successful in his expensive suit. Sophie pressed closer to Caroline when she saw him, instinctively recognizing a stranger despite their shared DNA. "Hello, Sophie," Marcus said with forced warmth. "I'm your father. I've been looking forward to meeting you." Sophie studied him carefully. "You don't look like the picture Mommy showed me." "People change over time," Marcus replied. "I want to be part of your life now. Why?" Sophie's question was devastatingly direct. Dr. Martinez observed their interaction, noting Sophie's body language as she remained pressed against Caroline's side, showing none of the warmth she displayed with David. "Sophie, can you tell me about your life at home?" Dr. Martinez asked. Sophie brightened immediately. "We read aviation books and practiced paper airplanes that Captain Sterling taught us. He helped me with my science project about aerodynamics. He knows everything about flying and makes Mommy smile." Marcus leaned forward. "How often do you see this Captain Sterling?" "Not much because he lives in Denver, but when he visits, we have the best time. He feels like family even though we're not related." The truth hit everyone differently. For Caroline, it validated her feelings. For Marcus, it challenged his custody claims. For Dr. Martinez, it provided valuable insight into Sophie's emotional attachments. The session continued, with Marcus attempting to connect with a daughter who remained politely distant. When they left the courthouse, Sophie was exhausted. "Do I have to see him again?" Sophie asked. "Probably, sweetheart. The judge wants you to have a chance to get to know him." "I don't want to get to know him. I want things to stay the way they are." That evening, Caroline called David, their conversations now frequent as the custody battle intensified. "How did the evaluation go?" David asked. Sophie was incredible, honest and clear about her feelings, but Marcus is performing the concerned father role without any genuine connection. "And the psychologist?" "Dr. Martinez seems fair. She asked Sophie directly about you, about our relationship. Sophie told the truth about how much she cares about you." David was quiet. "That could help or hurt depending on interpretation." "I've made a decision," Caroline said firmly. "I won't hide our relationship. Sophie deserves honesty, and so do you. Caroline, if this custody battle, no, I won't let Marcus control my life through fear. If he thinks he can manipulate me by threatening what makes us happy, he's wrong." David felt admiration for her courage. "What's the timeline?" "Final hearing in 2 weeks. Dr. Martinez submits her evaluation, attorneys present cases, and the judge decides about visitation rights. I'm coming to Chicago for the hearing." "David, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. Sophie matters to me, and so do you. If this judge is making decisions about our future, I want to be there. The private investigator will document your presence. Let them. Maybe it's time they understood that stability means surrounding children with people who love them." The next week blurred with legal preparation. Patricia compiled evidence of Sophie's happiness, school reports showing improved performance, teacher testimonials about increased confidence, documentation of activities and social development. They gathered character references for David from his airline supervisor, parents from Zoe's school, and flight crew colleagues. Caroline's business associates provided statements about her successful career, motherhood balance. Dr. Martinez conducted a second evaluation at Caroline's home. Sophie showed her room, aviation books, letters from Zoe, and preserved paper airplanes David had taught her to make. "This is Captain Sterling's flight wings," Sophie explained, pointing to the bulletin board. "He gave them to me. I wear them when I'm scared of flying." Dr. Martinez noted Sophie's attachment to meaningful objects and consistent references to feeling safe in her current family structure. The evening before the hearing, David arrived carrying a gift for Sophie and legal documents for Caroline's attorneys. Employment records, background checks, character references, everything your lawyers might need, he said, handing Caroline the folder. "And something for Sophie," he continued, showing the wrapped package. "Win or lose tomorrow, I want her to know how much she means to me." "What is it?" Caroline asked. "A promise. Whatever happens in that courtroom, I'm not disappearing from her life." At home, Sophie launched into David's arms with pure joy. Zoe was there too, providing moral support and demonstrating their family unity. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Sophie asked David as they worked on paper airplanes. "A little." "Are you?" "A little too. But Mommy says the judge wants to make sure I'm happy and safe." "And are you?" "Happy and safe." Sophie considered seriously. "I'm happiest when we're all together, me and Mommy and you and Zoe. That feels like the rightest thing in the world." David's eyes met Caroline's, both thinking the same thing from the mouths of babes. That night, Caroline and David shared wine in her kitchen, facing uncertain futures together. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Caroline said, taking his hand, "meeting you changed everything for me. You showed me what it looks like to put children first without sacrificing happiness." "You did the same for me," David replied, kissing her knuckles. "I thought I was fine alone with Zoe, but being with you and Sophie showed me how much richer life could be when you share it." They went to bed separately, Caroline in her room, David on the sofa, both knowing tomorrow would determine whether their growing love could flourish. The hearing morning dawned grey and drizzly, Sophie dressed in her best dress and David's pilot wings, while Caroline chose a conservative navy suit conveying maternal responsibility. As they prepared to leave, Sophie took David's hand solemnly. "Captain Sterling, no matter what that judge says, you're my family now, okay?" David knelt to her level, throat tight with emotion. "Okay, Sophie. You're my family too." Caroline watched with tears, knowing that whatever legal decision awaited, the bonds between their hearts were already decided. The only question was whether the court would recognize and protect the family they had chosen to become. The family courthouse felt intimidating with its marble floors and formal portraits. Caroline sat beside Patricia Holmes, hands folded to hide their trembling. Behind them, David and Zoe offered silent support from the gallery. Marcus occupied the defendant's table, projecting confidence. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Rebecca Chen," the bailiff announced. Judge Chen was a woman in her 50s with kind but penetrating eyes. Caroline had researched her background, a former family attorney known for putting children's interests first. "I've reviewed the custody petition and Dr. Martinez's evaluation," Judge Chen began. "Before hearing arguments, I have questions. Mr. Webb, you relinquished parental rights 7 years ago with no contact since. What changed to motivate this petition now?" Marcus straightened. "Your Honor, I was young and overwhelmed when Sophie was born. I've built stability, financial security, emotional maturity, genuine desire to be the father I should have been." "What prompted you to seek custody at this time?" Marcus hesitated. "I learned Sophie's living situation had changed. Ms. Blake involves her in adult relationships that may not be in the child's best interests." Judge Chen made notes. "Ms. Blake, how do you respond to concerns about your living situation?" Caroline stood, voice steady. "Your Honor, I've been involved with Captain David Sterling, a commercial pilot and single father. David has been positive for both Sophie and me. He helped Sophie overcome flying fears, encouraged her science interests, and provided stable male role modeling. Is Captain Sterling present today?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Is your relationship serious enough to affect Sophie's routine?" "Yes. David and I are discussing marriage, which would provide Sophie the two-parent household that benefits children's development." Marcus's attorney objected. Ms. Blake is using this custody challenge to legitimize a potentially temporary relationship. Caroline reached for a small velvet box, and shaking as she opened it to reveal an engagement ring. Your Honor, Captain Sterling proposed 3 days ago. I said yes. We're not legitimizing our relationship. We're protecting a family Sophie explicitly wants. The courtroom fell silent. Marcus showed surprise, then calculation. Judge Chen leaned forward. Captain Sterling, please stand. David rose confidently from the gallery. You understand marrying Miss Blake makes you Sophie's stepfather with full responsibilities. Yes, Your Honor, it would be the greatest honor of my life. You have your own daughter? Yes, ma'am. Zoe is 8. She and Sophie have become like biological sisters. Judge Chen studied him. What qualifies you to help raise Sophie? David spoke from the heart. Your Honor, I've been a single parent for 3 years since my wife's death. I understand putting a child's needs first. Sophie deserves stability, encouragement, and unconditional love. I can provide those things because I'm committed to being the father figure she needs and wants. Mr. Peterson, Marcus's attorney, interjected. This engagement appears calculated to respond to our petition. I'll determine timing implications. Judge Chen cut him off. Captain Sterling, when did you first meet Sophie? 4 months ago on a Chicago to Denver flight. She had a panic attack during turbulence, and I helped calm her by teaching her about airplanes. When did you know you wanted to marry Miss Blake? David glanced at Caroline lovingly. Honestly, I think I knew that first night, but I wanted certainty that my feelings were about building family together, not convenience. Sophie and Caroline deserve someone who chooses them completely. Judge Chen made more notes thoughtfully. 30-minute recess. When we reconvene, I'll hear closing arguments and render my decision. During recess, Caroline finally breathed. David approached, and she stood to meet him. When did you buy the ring? She whispered. The day after you told me about the petition. I knew Marcus was using our relationship against you. I wanted everyone to understand this isn't casual. This is forever. Caroline felt tears spring to her eyes. I can't believe you did that. The timing looks like a man who loves you and Sophie enough to make his intentions clear. David interrupted gently. Let them question the timeline. What matters is that Sophie knows we're committed to building something permanent. Patricia approached with a satisfied expression. That was brilliant strategy. Judge Chen is impressed by Captain Sterling's character references and his genuine connection with Sophie. Marcus's attorney is scrambling because they weren't prepared for an engagement announcement. What do you think our chances are? Caroline asked. Very good. Sophie's own testimony to Dr. Martinez was the strongest evidence we could have asked for. When an 8-year-old can articulate her feelings that clearly and consistently, judges listen. They returned to the courtroom as other families filed back in, people whose futures hung in the balance just as theirs did. Caroline noticed a woman with tear-stained cheeks clutching a young boy's hand, and her heart ached for all the children caught in adult conflicts they didn't create. When Judge Chen returned to the bench, the tension was palpable. Caroline felt David's presence behind her like a shield, his calm confidence helping her maintain composure. Before we proceed with closing arguments, Judge Chen announced, I want to clarify something for the record. Captain Sterling, your proposal to Miss Blake, was this decision influenced by these custody proceedings? David stood again. Your Honor, my decision to propose was influenced by falling in love with an exceptional woman and her remarkable daughter. The custody proceedings accelerated my timeline because I wanted to make my commitment clear. But they didn't create feelings that were already there. And Ms. Blake, are you accepting this proposal because you believe it will help your custody case? Caroline rose with dignity. Your Honor, I'm accepting David's proposal because I love him and because Sophie loves him. If I thought marriage was just a legal strategy, I would be doing a disservice to my daughter, who deserves a stepfather who chooses to be her family. Not someone who marries her mother for convenience. Judge Chen nodded approvingly. Thank you both for your honesty. Mr. Peterson, please proceed with your closing argument. As Marcus's attorney stood to make his final plea, Caroline felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. Whatever the judge decided, she knew they had told the truth about their love, their commitment, and their shared vision for Sophie's future. The ring on her finger, David's late wife's ring, offered with such trust and hope, represented not just their engagement, but their family's transformation from broken pieces into something whole and strong. The legal battle would end today. But their real journey as a family was just beginning. The recess felt endless. Caroline paced while David sat calmly with the girls, reading them a story he had brought. His steady presence anchored everyone's nerves. "Mommy, are you scared?" Sophie asked with childlike directness. "A little, sweetheart," Caroline admitted, kneeling down. "But I'm hopeful. The judge seems to care about what's best for children. I told Dr. Martinez I want to stay with you, and Captain Sterling," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "Marcus seems nice, but feels like a stranger. And families aren't supposed to feel like strangers." Caroline's throat tightened with pride at her daughter's wisdom. When court reconvened, tension filled the room. Judge Chen returned with Dr. Martinez's report and additional notes. "I've reviewed all evidence," Judge Chen began, "including the psychological evaluation, character references, and testimony. This case requires balancing the biological father's rights, the child's established routine, and overall stability." Caroline felt David's reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Mr. Peterson, your closing argument." Marcus's attorney stood confidently. "Your Honor, Mr. Webb acknowledges past mistakes, but demonstrates genuine commitment to rebuilding his daughter relationship. He has stable employment, appropriate housing, and biological connection courts traditionally recognize. Ms. Blake's recent engagement appears timed to influence proceedings. We request reasonable visitation, allowing Mr. Webb to build meaningful relationship with his daughter." Patricia rose for Caroline. "Your Honor, Sophie has thrived in her mother's sole custody. Evidence shows Ms. Blake's relationship with Captain Sterling enhanced Sophie's stability. Sophie's own words clearly express preference to remain in current living situation with Captain Sterling as stepfather. The child's voice must be weighted in these proceedings." Judge Chen nodded thoughtfully. "I'll render my decision now." Caroline's heart hammered as Patricia sat motionless beside her. "Mr. Webb, I don't question your sincerity in wanting to know your daughter. However, parental rights carry responsibilities extending beyond biological connection. You voluntarily relinquished those responsibilities when Sophie was a toddler, and she has no meaningful memory of your presence." Marcus's face showed growing concern. "Sophie is 8, old enough to articulate preferences clearly. Dr. Martinez's evaluation indicates strong, healthy attachments to her mother and Captain Sterling. She explicitly expressed anxiety about forced visitation with someone she considers a stranger." Judge Chen consulted her notes final time. "However, children benefit from knowing biological history when accomplished without trauma. Therefore, my ruling," Caroline held her breath, "primary custody remains with Ms. Blake. Mr. Webb is granted supervised visitation 2 hours monthly at neutral location with court-appointed supervisor. Visits are contingent upon Sophie's emotional comfort and can be modified if distressing." Marcus's shoulders sagged, but he nodded acceptance. "Furthermore, I approve Ms. Blake's request to relocate to Denver, Colorado after marriage to Captain Sterling. Two-parent household stability outweighs visitation schedule convenience." Caroline felt tears of relief. The judge had preserved their family and given them freedom to build their life anywhere. "Mr. Webb, I encourage using supervised visits to genuinely know your daughter without pressure. If you prove over time you can build healthy relationship with Sophie, we can revisit the schedule. But the child's well-being remains paramount." The gavel came down with finality. "Court is adjourned." Caroline turned to David, who had moved to the rail. Without words, they embraced, communicating relief, joy, and promise of their future. Sophie and Zoe pushed through the gate to join their parents, chattering excitedly about what the decision meant. "Are we going to live in Denver?" Sophie asked with excitement rather than anxiety. "Would you like that?" Caroline asked. "Yes." Then I can see Zoe every day, and Captain Sterling can teach me more about flying. Marcus approached as they gathered belongings, expression resigned but not hostile. Caroline, I want you to know, I'm genuinely glad Sophie is happy. That's what I should have wanted from the beginning. The door is always open for you to be part of her life in whatever way works, Caroline replied graciously. She should know her father when she's ready. As they left the courthouse together, David carrying Zoe, Caroline holding Sophie's hand, they looked like what they had always been in their hearts, a family who had chosen each other completely. Outside, Patricia congratulated them. Judge Chen made exactly the right decision. Sophie's testimony was the deciding factor. Children know what they need, and adults should listen. The drive home felt different from the tense morning journey. Sophie and Zoe chatted about their new Denver life, sharing bedrooms, aviation museums David could show them. Their excitement was infectious. That evening, after calling family with good news and starting packing lists, Caroline and David finally had a moment alone. I can't believe it's over, Caroline said, curling against David's side. The legal part is over, David corrected gently. The real work of building our family is just beginning. Are you nervous about having Sophie as your stepdaughter, officially? David considered seriously. I'm nervous about doing right by her. She deserves a father figure who puts her needs first. But nervous about loving her? No, that happened the first night I met her. And having me as your wife officially? Terrifying, David grinned. You'll expect me to remember fancy restaurant etiquette and not embarrass you at corporate events. I'll expect you to keep teaching me how to be the parent Sophie deserves, Caroline replied seriously, and to keep showing me that love multiplies when shared instead of dividing. They sat in comfortable silence, watching snow fall on Chicago streets. Tomorrow would bring the practical work of combining households, cities, and lives into one shared future. There would be challenges, new schools, routines, ways of being a family of 4 instead of 2 families of 2. But tonight, Caroline felt simply grateful. Grateful for the turbulent flight that brought David into their lives. Grateful for Sophie's courage in court. Grateful for Zoe's ready acceptance of a new sister and stepmother. Grateful for David's unwavering commitment to their children. I love our family, Caroline said softly. I love our family too, David replied, kissing her head. All of it, the chaos, the joy, the impossible logistics of making it work. Through the doorway, they could see Sophie and Zoe asleep on the guest room floor, surrounded by airplane books and sketches for new paper plane designs. Tomorrow, they would wake as sisters in every way that mattered. The legal battle was over. Their real life together was just beginning. The 30-minute recess felt like hours. Caroline paced the courthouse hallway, while David sat calmly with Zoe and Sophie, reading them a story from a picture book he had thoughtfully brought. His steady presence anchored everyone's nerves, including Caroline's. "Mommy," Sophie approached with the direct honesty that children possess. "Are you scared?" "A little, sweetheart," Caroline admitted, kneeling to Sophie's level. "But I'm also hopeful." The judge seems like someone who really cares about what's best for children. "I told Dr. Martinez that I want to stay with you and Captain Sterling," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "I told her that Marcus seems nice, but he feels like a stranger, and families aren't supposed to feel like strangers." Caroline's throat tightened with pride. Her 8-year-old daughter possessed wisdom that some adults never developed. When court reconvened, the tension in the room was palpable. Judge Chen returned to her bench, carrying Dr. Martinez's report and additional notes from the recess. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented today," Judge Chen began, "including the psychological evaluation, character references, and testimony from both parties. This case requires me to balance several important factors: the biological father's rights, the child's established routine and preferences, and the overall stability of the proposed living arrangements." Caroline felt David's hand squeeze her shoulder from behind. The physical connection steadied her breathing. "Mr. Peterson, please present your closing argument." Marcus's attorney stood with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, Mr. Webb acknowledges his past mistakes, but has demonstrated genuine commitment to rebuilding a relationship with his daughter. He has stable employment, appropriate housing, and the biological connection that courts traditionally recognize. Miss Blake's recent engagement appears timed to influence these proceedings, and introducing a stepfather figure so quickly could destabilize Sophie's emotional development. We request reasonable visitation rights that allow Mr. Webb to gradually build a meaningful relationship with his daughter. Patricia Holmes rose for Caroline's closing. Your Honor, Sophie Blake has lived her entire remembered life in her mother's sole custody. She has thrived academically, socially, and emotionally. The evidence shows that Ms. Blake's relationship with Captain Sterling has enhanced Sophie's stability, not threatened it. Sophie's own words to Dr. Martinez clearly express her preference to remain in her current living situation, with the addition of Captain Sterling as a stepfather figure. The child's voice must be given weight in these proceedings. Judge Chen nodded thoughtfully. I'm going to render my decision now, as I believe this family has waited long enough for resolution. Caroline's heart hammered against her ribs. Beside her, Patricia sat completely still, years of experience having taught her to reveal nothing during crucial moments. Mr. Webb, Judge Chen addressed Marcus directly. I don't question your sincerity in wanting to know your daughter. However, parental rights carry responsibilities that extend beyond biological connection. You voluntarily relinquished those responsibilities when Sophie was a toddler, and she has no meaningful memory of your presence in her life. Marcus's face began to show concern as he sensed the direction of the judge's reasoning. Sophie is 8 years, old enough to articulate her preferences clearly and thoughtfully. Dr. Martinez's evaluation indicates that she has strong, healthy attachments to her mother and to Captain Sterling. She has explicitly expressed anxiety about forced visitation with someone she considers a stranger. Judge Chen paused, consulting her notes one final time. However, I also recognize that children benefit from knowing their biological history when it can be accomplished without trauma. Therefore, my ruling is as follows. Caroline held her breath. Primary custody remains with Ms. Blake, as it has been throughout Sophie's life. Mr. Webb is granted supervised visitation for 2 hours per month, to be conducted at a neutral location with a court-appointed supervisor present. These visits are contingent upon Sophie's emotional comfort and can be modified if they prove distressing to the child. Marcus's shoulders sagged with disappointment, but he nodded acceptance of the ruling. Furthermore, Judge Chen continued, I'm approving Ms. Blake's request to relocate with Sophie to Denver, Colorado, should she choose to do so after her marriage to Captain Sterling. The stability of a two-parent household outweighs the convenience of Mr. Webb's visitation schedule. Caroline felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. The judge had not only preserved their family unit, but had given them permission to build their life wherever they chose. Mr. Webb, Judge Chen addressed Marcus one final time, I encourage you to use these supervised visits to genuinely get to know your daughter without pressure or expectation. If you prove over time that you can build a healthy relationship with Sophie, we can revisit the visitation schedule. But the child's well-being remains paramount. The gavel came down with finality. This court is adjourned. Caroline turned to David, who had moved to the rail separating the gallery from the council tables. Without words, they reached for each other, their embrace communicating relief, joy, and the promise of their future together. Sophie and Zoe pushed through the swinging gate to join their parents, both girls chattering excitedly about what the judge's decision meant for their family. Are we going to live in Denver? Sophie asked with excitement rather than anxiety. Would you like that? Caroline asked. Yes! Then I can see Zoe every day, and Captain Sterling can teach me more about flying, and maybe I can visit his airplane at the airport. Marcus approached them as they gathered their belongings, his expression resigned but not hostile. Caroline, I want you to know I'm genuinely glad Sophie is happy. That's what I should have wanted from the beginning. The door is always open for you to be part of her life in whatever way works for everyone, Caroline replied graciously. She should know her father when she's ready. As they left the courthouse together, David carrying Zoe, Caroline holding Sophie's hand, they looked like what they had always been in their hearts, a family who had chosen each other completely. Outside the courthouse, Patricia Holmes shook hands with everyone and congratulated them on the outcome. Judge Chen made exactly the right decision, she said to Caroline. Sophie's testimony was the deciding factor. Children know what they need, and adults should listen. The drive back to Caroline's house felt different than the tense journey to court that morning. Sophie and Zoe chatted in the back seat about their new life in Denver, about sharing a bedroom, about all the aviation museums David could take them to visit. Their excitement was infectious, and Caroline found herself laughing for the first time in weeks. That evening, after they had called David's parents and Caroline's mother to share the good news, after they had started making lists of everything that would need to be packed and moved to Denver, Caroline and David finally had a moment alone together. "I can't believe it's really over," Caroline said, curling against David's side on her living room sofa. "The legal part is over," David corrected gently. "The real work of building our family is just beginning. Are you nervous about having Sophie as your stepdaughter officially?" David considered the question seriously. "I'm nervous about doing right by her. She deserves a father figure who puts her needs first, who helps her grow into the amazing woman she's going to become. But nervous about loving her? No, that part happened the first night I met her." Caroline lifted her head to look at him. "And what about having me as your wife officially?" "Terrifying," David said with a grin. "You're going to expect me to remember which fork to use at fancy restaurants and not embarrass you at corporate events. I'm going to expect you to keep teaching me how to be the kind of parent Sophie deserves," Caroline replied seriously, "and to keep showing me that love multiplies when you share it instead of dividing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching through the window as snow began to fall on Chicago's streets. Tomorrow they would start the practical work of combining two households, two cities, two separate lives into one shared future. There would be challenges ahead, adjusting to new schools, new routines, new ways of being a family of four instead of two families of two. But tonight, Caroline allowed herself to simply feel grateful. Grateful for the turbulent flight that had brought David into their lives. Grateful for Sophie's courage in expressing her true feelings to the judge. Grateful for Zoe's ready acceptance of a new sister and stepmother. Grateful for David's unwavering commitment to putting their children first. "I love our family," Caroline said softly. "I love our family too," David replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. All of it, the chaos and the joy and the impossible logistics of making it all work. Through the living room doorway, they could see Sophie and Zoe asleep on the guest room floor, surrounded by books about airplanes and sketches for new paper airplane designs. Tomorrow, they would wake up as sisters in every way that mattered, ready to begin the next chapter of their shared story. The legal battle was over. Their real life together was just beginning. 6 months later, their Denver home buzzed with Sunday morning energy. Caroline sat cross-legged on the carpet, helping 9-year-old Sophie with origami airplane designs, while Zoe read from an aviation magazine nearby. David moved between kitchen and living room, preparing their weekly family breakfast. The house was smaller than Caroline's Chicago mansion, but infinitely warmer. They had chosen it together, all four of them, imagining their life in each room. Sophie and Zoe shared the large upstairs bedroom by choice, twin beds separated by a desk for homework and letters to Chicago friends. Caroline had stepped back from daily company operations, becoming chairman to work primarily from Denver. The decision surprised business associates, but not her family. For the first time, Caroline was prioritizing relationships over revenue. "Daddy, the pancakes are burning," Zoe called from the floor. "They're developing character," David called back. Adjusting the stove heat. Their wedding had taken place 3 months earlier in the chapel where David married his first wife. Sophie and Zoe served as joint maids of honor, wearing matching dresses and carrying paper airplane bouquets instead of flowers. The ceremony was small but joyful, just family and close friends witnessing their commitment. Sophie's relationship with Marcus had evolved appropriately. Monthly coffee shop visits allowed Sophie to ask questions about her biological father while maintaining emotional safety. Marcus proved better as occasional presence than primary parent, and everyone felt comfortable with the arrangement. "Mom, look," Sophie said, holding up her completed origami jet. "Passenger plane with movable wing flaps." Caroline examined her daughter's work admiringly. Sophie's skills had developed remarkably since David began teaching advanced techniques, and her aerodynamics understanding impressed teachers regularly. "Museum quality," Caroline said honestly. "For your class presentation next week, Zoe and I are presenting together. She'll explain real airplane controls. I'll demonstrate paper model principles." The girls maintained their sister bond beautifully, Zoe's practical engineering mind balancing Sophie's artistic creativity, Sophie's adventurous spirit encouraging Zoe's natural caution. "Breakfast ready," David announced. Carrying golden pancakes to the dining table. Sunday mornings were sacred, no work calls, no activities, just family sharing food and planning their week. "My Australian pen pal wants to know if American paper airplanes fly differently," Zoe announced over syrup. "What do you think?" David asked, curious about her reasoning. "Physics works everywhere, but paperweights or humidity might affect performance," Zoe replied thoughtfully. Caroline marveled at their household's sophisticated conversations. David's influence elevated everyone's scientific thinking, while her business background taught strategic planning approaches. "Speaking of letters," Caroline said, producing an official envelope from her robe pocket. "This came from the FAA yesterday." David looked interested. Caroline had been working with the Federal Aviation Administration on grants for teaching aviation science in elementary schools, inspired by Sophie's transformation from fearful flyer to passionate student. "We got the funding," Caroline announced with a grin. $50,000 for curriculum development and teacher training. The girls cheered. David leaned over to kiss Caroline's cheek. "That's amazing. When do we start?" "I hoped you'd ask. The program needs a technical advisor with pilot certification and child education experience." "Are you offering me a job, Mrs. Sterling?" "I'm offering you a partnership, Captain Sterling," Caroline replied, using his title with intimate warmth. Their collaboration on aviation education had strengthened their marriage bond. David provided technical expertise, while Caroline handled administration and funding. They had piloted the program in 3 Denver schools, with results exceeding expectations. After breakfast, they drove to the local park for weekly paper airplane sessions. It had become neighborhood entertainment, families gathering to watch David demonstrate techniques while Caroline organized competitions. Today felt special because Marcus was joining them. His relationship with Sophie had progressed to comfortable family activity inclusion, and Caroline wanted to demonstrate their blended family's capacity for healthy expansion. Marcus arrived carrying store-bought paper airplanes, trying to participate but uncertain about protocol. Sophie greeted him with polite warmth, not desperate affection seeking approval, but comfortable acknowledgement of someone who earned extended family placement. "Want to see the glider design Captain Sterling taught me?" Sophie offered easily. "It stays airborne almost 30 seconds with proper throwing technique." Marcus watched with genuine interest as Sophie demonstrated, offering encouragement without competing with David's expertise. Caroline felt proud of how naturally Sophie navigated complex relationships. "Sophie's become quite the engineer," Marcus told Caroline. "You've done incredible work raising her." "We all contributed," Caroline replied generously. "She needed different things at different times, and the right people appeared when she was ready." David approached, carrying Zoe on his shoulders, both laughing about a tree-stuck airplane. Caroline's heart squeezed gratefully, watching her husband with both girls, biological and chosen daughters, receiving equal attention. "Ready for the grand finale?" David called. They had worked weeks on a special project, large-scale poster-board airplane designed to carry payload. Today's cargo was a banner reading, "The Sterling Family Built for Flight," that Sophie had painted carefully. The entire family collaborated on launch preparation. David provided technical guidance. Caroline managed logistics. Sophie and Zoe handled artistry. Marcus helped timing. When the banner-carrying plane soared across the park in perfect arc, everyone cheered, like witnessing space exploration. Other families applauded, and children ran over examining engineering. David and Caroline found themselves surrounded by curious parents requesting education program information. "This is what we were meant to do," Caroline whispered to David as they watched Sophie and Zoe teaching younger children basic airplane folding. "Build a family?" David asked. "Build a legacy," Caroline corrected. "Show people that love multiplies when shared, that families can be chosen and created in ways making everyone stronger." As afternoon sun set, they packed supplies and prepared for home. Marcus said goodbye with genuine warmth, hugging Sophie and shaking David's hand like men who found peaceful coexistence. For a child, they both cared. About the drive home was filled with comfortable chatter about the day's successes and plans for next week's flying session. Sophie and Zoe had already begun designing more complex aircraft, and Caroline was thinking about expanding their community program to include other parks around Denver. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Caroline and David sat on their back porch, sharing wine and watching stars appear in clear Colorado sky. David's flight bag sat nearby, packed for early morning Seattle departure, but these days his absences felt manageable rather than lonely. "Do you ever think about that first flight?" Caroline asked, curling into David's side on the porch swing. "Every day," David replied, kissing her head. "I think about how scared Sophie was, how helpless you felt, and how a simple paper airplane changed all our lives. I think about how we almost didn't meet. If Sophie hadn't panicked, if you weren't working that flight, if I hadn't been brave enough to give you my card—" "But we did meet," David interrupted gently. "Sophie did need help, and you were brave enough to reach out. I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in recognizing right moments when they appear." Caroline lifted her head to look at her husband's face in the porch light. 3 years ago, she had been successful but lonely, measuring worth in earnings and market share. Tonight, she was part of a family creating joy for others, a woman who learned to value relationships over achievements without sacrificing either. On the mantel inside, their new family portrait sat in place of honor, all 4 of them laughing together at the park. Paper airplanes caught mid-flight around them. The professional photographer had captured something magical, the moment when 4 separate people became one unbreakable unit. "I love our life," Caroline said simply. "I love our life too," David replied. "And I love that we built it together, one careful fold at a time." Inside, they could hear their daughter's soft breathing, 2 children who had gained sisters, parents, and the kind of stability that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Paper airplanes from the day's adventures sat on the kitchen counter, some simple, some complex, all carrying the love and attention that had gone into their creation. Caroline fell asleep that night, thinking about trajectories and flight paths, about how the smallest adjustments in angle or weight could change a paper airplane's entire journey. Their family had been like that, small acts of kindness and courage creating the lift that carried them all towards something beautiful and lasting. Sometimes the best flights begin with someone who knows how to fold hope into something that can soar.